Hey guys, Dr. Drunk aka here with World of Warships and a ship review of something that's coming new to World of Warships, the new line of Italian destroyers. And we're going to focus specifically on the Tier 10, the Attilio Regolo. Attilio Regolo, I don't know. It's pasta boat. Initially classified as a light cruiser, the Capitani Romani class of ships essentially occupy an intermediate position between destroyers and cruisers. Their artillery is comprised of 8 135mm dual-purpose guns. As you can see, I have no commander on the Regolo right now, so we'll go through her equipment and such before we throw a captain on there and we can take a look at her. But very similar to the rest of the Italian lines, there is one defining feature of the Italian destroyers. Actually, there's two, maybe three features of the Italian destroyers, and they are not exactly similar to the Paolo Emilio or really the FR-25, which has been recently released. Those of you who have been in the game for a while will be familiar with the Paolo Emilio, the Yolo Emilio, the Paolo or Paolo Yolmilio, whatever the hell you want to call it, with its abysmally bad reload of 10.7 seconds, and its really brutally hard-hitting short-range torpedoes that really give this ship its namesake of the Yolo Emilio. The new Italian line does not play even remotely the same. It's a odd departure in that in many cases Wargaming will release a premium that is complementary to the line as opposed to an exact flip-flop of the line. Bear in mind this is an early access ship as of 11.2. These are the stats. I don't know if they're going to change, and I don't know if it's going to be a different boat by the time it reaches full release or by the time you actually watch this. I highly doubt it. I find the ship tends to be in a pretty good place if it's not a high skill floor ship in its own right. But the Regolo, as you can see, she's pretty chunky if you want to look at it. Very much like a light cruiser. Big chunky superstructure, fairly thick hull. She's not really slim and trim. I mean, she's not like, if you look at other style gunboats, she's not like a Kleber that's very sleek and very streamlined. It doesn't really look like this ship with its short, squat design and thick sides should be as fast as it is, but it really is. If we try to look at her equipment and the UI doesn't fail, the main feature of the Italian lines thus far, the Italian cruisers, the Italian battleships, has been their inclusion of semi-armor piercing shells or SAP shells, and the Italian destroyer line follows along very similarly with this. However, in a stark contrast to the cruisers and battleships, and more in line with the Paolo Emilio, the Research Bureau ship, she runs with HE and SAP shells. Anybody who's played the Paolo Emilio will know that 135mm SAP hits incredibly hard. It's a great ammo type. It just has a pretty poor reload. The Regolo does mitigate this somewhat with a 4.8 second reload time. And again, this is without captain skills. It is with modules, however. But a 4.8 second reload prior to captain skills, 20.7 180-degree turn time, so those turrets are relatively slow. Maximum HE shell damage of 1,950 points and maximum SAP shell damage of 3,050 points. And those shells do hit hard, I can tell you that from experience. She has 26,800 base hit points, which is, as far as a DD is concerned, pretty thick. She's pretty tanky. Along those lines, she's going to be, if we compare to other gunboats, 25.9 for a Kleber with Survivability Expert. The Regolo has more hit points base without Survivability Experts. I believe this goes up to about 30,300 with Survivability, but we'll look at that momentarily. Similar boats. I mean, the odd thing is there's really nothing similar to the Regolo in the game at this point, except for maybe the Paolo Emilio. Let's look at the small one. It has 22.7, but has 4 heals, so you'll effectively get another 12k out of it. So you have a similar effective health pool as a small end. Torpedoes, in contrast to the Paolo Emilio line, reload in 90 seconds, a minute and a half with a 13.5k range. They only do 13.9k alpha, and they are very slow at 56 knots. This contributes to the concept that the Italian DD line is going to be heavily torpedo based, and that is true to an extent, but it does have features which allow it to play more as an ambush predator. She has terrible main battery firing range at 9.6k. And that is with reload mod equipped. That has no captain skills attached to it. And she's incredibly speedy at 43.1 knots. Again, no engine boost at the time. This is base speed if we compare to a Kleber. A Kleber has a 46.2 knot base speed. You have cruisers that are doing 34.7. You're doing almost 8k more. A small one, for example, here is 36.8. So she's a quick boat. She is not terribly maneuverable with only a 5.7 second rudder shift time, though. So that's something to bear in mind. Equipment upgrades, main armaments 1. Engine boost mod 1, you can actually you can't replace this. You could take engine room protection if you didn't have this module, but I recommend the engine boost 1. We'll get into that in a moment. Plus 30% is a long time. Aiming systems mod 1 is pretty decent tool to have. You don't really need main battery 2. You really don't need torpedo tubes 1. I mean, I suppose you could, but I don't find the 5 knot difference makes all that of a change, you know. Prop mod 1, you could take steering gears mod 1 if you really wanted to. I don't find it necessary, even though she's not terribly nimble in the water with a relatively large turning circle. I don't find this necessary. Prop mod 1 makes more sense. To be able to attempt to speed juke, which is much more difficult than you would expect because of your short gun range. We'll get to that in just a second. But you really do want to be able to accelerate quickly. Not that you're ever going to be really stopped in this boat, but it's handy to have. Depth charge mod 1, don't even bother. As much as subs have done their best to destroy the game, they're working on it. Concealment system mod 1 is a necessity in this slot. There's nothing, I don't see any reason for taking steering gears mod 1 because your concealment already with just a module is 8 kilometers. You're very quickly reaching the point where your gun range will barely be any better than your concealment. So you need concealment on this line. And of course, main battery mod 3. And that of course is to increase that reload rate, like I said, down to 4.8 seconds. High explosive shells with a 9.5% fire chance, which is pretty good. 23 millimeter pen is very, very meh. 38 millimeter pen on the semi-armor piercing shells and the sap shells with pretty solid average or maximum damage alpha strike. Again, the torpedoes are really nothing to be appreciable. They're fine. They're not spectacular. Where the gimmicks come in here, and of course every ship has to have a gimmick. Where the gimmicks come in here is her consumable loadout. You'll notice no heal, hence the large hit point pool, but she has a standard damage control party, 5-second action time and 38-second reload time. She has an exhaust smoke generator or a fuel smoke, which gives her a 46-second smoke screen with a 76-second reload time and 6 charges. This will keep up with her at any given speed. I've attempted the Swift and Silence test, and it seems to have been rectified with the Paolo Emilio buff, correction, patch, whatever you want to call it. So it doesn't seem that you can outrun your smokescreen. And of course, emergency engine power giving you a 25% speed boost for 32.5 seconds with the engine boost mod 1 and 150-second reload time. So these are not reloading in concert. That is something to note. One thing I will definitely say early on, the engine boost mod is more for getting yourself out of trouble in open water. Smoke mod has other uses. You actually can do significant damage from that smoke, especially being a 46-second smoke. 10 volleys of sap into a broadside cruiser at about 4 to 5k alpha per volley can do a lot of damage. Smoke is good for getting away. It's good for island hopping, etc., etc. Emergency engine power I find being more useful in many cases where you do need to get a couple of shots in, but you really either don't have a smoke available or don't really want to use it. You don't necessarily need to use it. Maybe it's a 1v2, you kill a DD and you want to get away from a battleship or something like that. Engine boost is very useful in that respect. Let's look for commanders. If we go to the commander tab, we're going to put Sansonetti on here because why would we not? Sansonetti's talents do translate here. Confederate achievement gives you a main battery reload boost. Far reach on a kill, you get 8% to your firing range, which is incredibly handy in this case. And concealed reserves. 100 main battery shells give you another speed boost and smoke. I'm sorry, excuse me. They give you a 10% action time buff to your speed boost and smoke. Also quite handy. For captain skills, what I've taken in this case, grease the gears to offset the 13% penalty of the reload mod. Last stand to ensure that your rudder stays in the game. Survivability expert, adrenaline rush, concealment, RPF, and of course, main battery and AA expert plus 20% firing range. I prefer this over the range mod. You get more range and you do get slight buff to your AA, regardless of the fact that AA really does nothing in this game anyway. In order, I would take Grease the Gears, Last Stand, Survivability, and Concealment as your first 10 points. Your next 4, I would take Main Battery and AA. Your 17 points, I would take Adrenaline Rush. And for your last 4, I would take Radiolocation. Why do I recommend Radiolocation? Well, we'll go through stats here in a moment, but to short, you have a 7.2k detect. So you're going to be outspotted by almost everything that you're going to see at your tier. Going through the actual boat itself, armor layout, she has 60mm turrets, which I find the turrets do not tend to get knocked out too frequently on this. In DD versus DD fights, I don't think I've lost a turret in any of the games that I've played, and in a lot of cruiser fights, especially shooting HE, I don't generally find that you lose turrets all that frequently either. It has a standard 19mm hull, which is nothing out of the ordinary, a 19mm deck, and a 13mm superstructure. So it's reasonably tanky as far as battle or destroyers go, but it's nothing particularly special. Survivability-wise, with the Survivability Expert skill, we are up to 30,300 hit points. No heal. No saturation mechanic either. As we talked about, she has 4x2, 135mm guns, shooting HE and SAP. She has a reasonable initial velocity, very good armor pen on the SAP shells. And again, with main battery and AA specialist, she has 11.5k range, which is not too bad. Torpedoes, as we said, centerline mounted, oddly tucked under the deck here, but centerline mounted 2x4 533 millimeter tubes, 90-second reload, 13.5K maximum range, 13.9K alpha, and they're slow as hell at 56 knots, but they're only detected at 1 kilometer, so they're not too bad, honestly. Depth charges, who cares? To be very honest, who cares? You don't get much. AA defense, it's marginal, okay? 3.7 kilometers, as is the Italian flavor. 35% sector reinforcement, only 188 continuous damage. They're not very good. They're very not good. Interestingly enough, she does not get flak. Unless I'm mistaken, she does not get flak. So your AA's meh. Maneuverability, again, 43.1 knots, a 770 meter turning circle, which is pretty large when you think about it. And a 5.7 second rudder shift. She is not a nimble princess. 7.2 detect by sea. Who cares about submarines? I hate them anyway. 3.5K AA or aircraft spotting range. And of course, 2 kilometer assured detection. And again, the equipment tab, which I believe is a mod here. Maybe not anymore. You can see what we're running. So, how does she, well, exterior. Camo available, obviously. She's going to have a tier 10 perma camo, which is pretty ugly, to be very honest. I much prefer the hot wind camo. This is the pre-sale event, pre-tech tree, early access camo. It's much, much nicer looking than the actual Type 20 permanent camouflage that she comes equipped with. In terms of signals, India X-ray. You can also take Victor Lima. You can also take Juliet Whiskey. Consumable reload time buff, speed buff, smoke buff. Please take a det flag. They're not that expensive. Please take them. Nothing sucks more than being detonated in a tier 10 game, especially as a destroyer. But that being said, how does she handle? Let's take a look at some gameplay footage and see how she rolls. Okay, the first thing that you need to know about the Regolo is that this boat is 100% dependent upon your ability to have patience with your map position and with choosing your fights. This is not a ship with low detect that can push into the middle of the map. It's not a ship that really can't push into unknowns. You really want to see the entirety of the map before you commit to anything, because without any kind of heal, you really don't have a lot of options for escaping, if you will. Any damage you take will be permanent, and this is a perfect example. In this case, we have a radar on the flank. I know I'm spotted. I know there's a torpedo hit out of smoke, so you can actually pick this fight, which is generally basically a one-on-one fight. You know, you have a 1v1, a DD versus a DD. The Montana's not helping. The Petro's behind an island, and I do have the ability to use smoke to disengage here while continuing to do damage. It's one of the main ways you're going to make your money using the Regolo. The other thing to remember, the Regolo is big and chunky, and it's a perfect example of eating torps in the butt. Probably can beat that if the engine boost doesn't run out, but that's still a thing. You really want to play this boat as an ambush predator. Okay, you don't take sustained fights in this ship. This ship is not really designed for sustained fights. It's really designed to essentially hit and run. Perfect example, you have a broadside DD, and here you have a Grozovoid that shows up in front of you. The sap shells here have big damage potentials. You 7k salvo on a Grozovoid. Aiming, of course, helps, but that's beside the point. Perfect example here, you do some damage. Somebody else is helping to spot for you, but you're able to do damage, you're able to disengage at the same time. So you essentially chip damage off of your targets, and then you leave and you return later. This is a very similar playstyle to things like the Kid or the Daring, things like that. You basically do damage, you leave, and then you return to do damage again after you've healed up and can pick a different fight. Use of your tools, your smoke, your engine boost are generally key to your survival. In this case, again, division play with a radar cruiser and a DD. Regolo does excel in this respect. Here we're using HE, and I think it was mainly because I wasn't paying any attention in this case, but the HE is perfectly functional, 135mm HE. It does not do the same alpha strike damage as the SAP does, but it is perfectly functional. You can see we switch back to SAP here. Shima decides he's turning away, so we're going to basically aim for him using HE in this case. Didn't need to, but we can. We have the smoke. That's keeping us concealed. We're always going to use the engine boost, speed back, and make sure that nothing is going to strike us. Consumable use is going to be one of the great determinants as to how effective you are in this ship. Smart use of the smoke screen and the engine boost will allow you to basically hit and run, do significant amounts of damage. That's 6k to a lightning. There's another 3, and again, this guy smokes up to get away, but okay, that's fine. He's close enough, we can blind fire him and smoke very effectively. Now we just basically disappear. In this case, he left us a smoke screen, which helped us to disengage, but as you can see, we allowed our own smoke to set that trap. So again, effective use of consumables is going to matter. Gunboating versus other destroyers, if you can pick one-on-ones, even if you do not get the first shot, which in many cases you won't, because your concealment is pretty terrible, you do win even a remotely protracted gunfight, especially, like in this case, there's a 4600 salvo against a gearing. Other DDs really don't generally stand up well to your alpha strike capability. Picking your battles, though, is very important. You have to use your mini-map in order to find battles that you can win. If you look at the mini-map in this case, I know there's a DD in this cap. I know there's nothing supporting him per se. I have islands that I can use to take advantage of in this case, and this is where a ship like the Regolo will shine. It just happens to be that this is an Adriatico, which is the tier 9, the comparable tech tree tier 9, which I'm dealing with at the same time. GK has secondaries on, and yes, secondaries are slightly scary to this because it is a huge, chonky boat, and it does take a lot of damage from them. But it's not that terrifying, honestly. Using speed, like I said, the speed juking is relatively... The acceleration, deceleration is relatively good, which I mentioned. That's why you take the prop mod in the port portion of this. You can accelerate and decelerate relatively well. We'll see it here. Whereas, okay, I have an eagle flying overhead, and you can see the AA does absolutely nothing. We know that Zal's probably looking at us, so we're going to play with our throttle here. We're going to use our consumables to protect ourselves. We get 1 overpen instead of 12 overpens, which is a plus. We're going to use our consumables here. And there's a bit of a misplay in this clip here, because I did not expect this guy to run directly at me. It's an interesting choice on only 8k, but you can see the power of Sap here. He takes about 6. I trade him for about 8, and this guy's doomed. He has no choice. 9K trade for 8K trade, and it was about 9, maybe even a little bit less. Just goes to show you the effectiveness of the alpha damage of these DDs. These DDs have incredible alpha damage, and that's a perfect example of picking a 1v1 fight. There's really nothing that can directly support him. There's shots coming in from ships 10K away, which you can speed juke, you can dodge. So it's definitely a case. Same concept here. There's really nothing that can support this Fletcher, so we can open water gunboat. Sap, of course, is very effective. It's particularly effective. You can see bounces there. It is particularly effective against ships that give you any kind of broadside or any kind of remote angle where you can get pens on superstructure, pens through a deck, or pens through a stern or something like that. Perfect example here. Something that highlights what the Regolo is very good at. Now, she's not terribly agile, but she can get away with this. Further example of how the Sap is just really an effective ammo type against destroyers. That's a 4K salvo against a Holland, which was relatively angled. And this was... There's another 1700. That's pretty poor with a couple of ricochets, but honestly, there's 1700 and there's another 7K, so that's probably about 10K off of Holland in one exchange. Same kind of thing will happen in this case where, okay, you have a high base speed. Even if something's starting to run away from you, you'll have the ability to generally run it down a little bit. I'm not sure what this Yamagiri was attempting to do, but he's doing what he's doing. We trade maybe 6K worth of hit points to ensure that, well, this man's going to be dead. This guy can't get away. We're in smoke. He is continually spotted, both by radar and by the ship, and we're able to put him down. It also shows that quickly returning to another target. Make the most out of the consumables you have. Your smoke screens are short, but they do have a short cooldown. They have extremely good potential for farming from, as long as you are minimap aware. Again, perfect example of Alpha Strike. This guy, this Forrest Sherman is going to be able to do some damage to us, but remember, shells that have a high alpha, you don't need to hit nearly as many of them as you would think in order to put somebody out of the game. In this case, we hit 2 there, and we hit another 1 there, and that's enough to do it. So you only really need 3 shells to be able to put somebody out of the game in that respect. The Alpha Strike really does mitigate a lot of the issues with this. The other thing that mitigates some of the issues with this boat is the actual ridiculous top speed. With the speed boost going, you're doing in excess of 51 knots. The speed boost doesn't last very long. The speed boost is all of, I think, 28 to 30 seconds, something of that nature. It's not, you don't get a lot of it, but you can use it very, very effectively to run down other boats. It works particularly well in this case with a submarine, as subs exist in the game now. They have such ridiculous speed underwater that a lot of DDs, things like a Daring, whatnot, have extreme difficulty in chasing them and killing them. Which, I mean, that being the functional capacity of a destroyer, being unable to do that is pretty frustrating. Regolo does have the ability to do that. It's extremely high base speed, combined with the speed boost, makes this a really effective tool for hunting submarines. So far, though, we've talked a lot about destroyers and how to utilize the ship as an ambush predator. Minimap awareness, well, what about battleships, cruisers, and the like? Well, SAP as an armor whereas an ammunition choice does extremely well against cruisers and battleships as well. In this case, you can see we've got a Conqueror broadside, so of course SAP is going to be the ammunition of choice, and we're doing between 2 and 4K per salvo. I have seen salvos upwards of 7K on German battleships, but I think that's more the exception rather than the rule. This clip actually will demonstrate that as much as SAP is a very effective ammo type, HE is going to be something that you use a fair amount of. I would consider SAP to be the primary ammunition type for this particular ship, but don't sleep on the HE, don't sleep on the ability to set fires. You can also see the ability of that ship to speed juke is not insignificant. You'll be able to see the utilization of your consumables to keep you in the fight, despite the fact that you may be in danger. This guy blew his radar, so now it's you're able to smoke and essentially free farm for a little while. And the smoke screen on this is not necessarily bad. You can take it with you, and you can farm from about 40 seconds worth of damage. 40 seconds worth of damage in this ship is not... It's not a bad amount of firepower, to be very honest. I know some of the early reviews of this line was that the guns are very slow reloading, they're very short range, they're going to be difficult to work with. I haven't found the guns to be difficult to work with. The range is somewhat frustrating because it is relatively short without the Sansonetti perk activated. 11.3 is relatively short when it comes to destroyer guns these days, but the ammunition selection on these boats and the combination of tools make it a very effective ship in many, many cases. You can see, even on a very angled target, you can see the effectiveness of SAP here with 6K on that volley, another 4K on that volley. You can chew up enemy hit point pools very, very quickly with this. The biggest thing I would suggest that most players will find with the Italians are when to utilize the various ammunition types. Some players are going to have difficulty with when to switch, when to use HE, when to use SAP. The general rule there is if it's heavily angled, you're going to be using HE. If it's relatively broadside, you're going to be using SAP. If it's a very lightly armored target, you're going to be using SAP in almost any case anyway. Agility on display that you're able to make that turn in real quick. And here's a perfect example of doing damage to something like a Frederick de Grosse or a German battleship with large superstructure. 5,600 chunks on that, 4,700 chunks on that. You know, you're able to do significant damage. If you consider that your smoke screen lasts about 40 seconds, your reload is around 4.5 seconds, you can get somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 salvos away per charge of your smoke. And if you're using 6 charges, that's a fair amount of damage. Perfect example of what the SAP can do. 4,600 to a broadside Seattle. You know, it's not insignificant amounts of damage when you're considering that this is really just a DD that doesn't have armor piercing in any way, shape, or form. The thing to remember with this, and as that you may think about too, is a ship like this is incredibly good for setting a flank. I mentioned earlier that you want to kind of play ambush, you kind of want to play very map aware. A ship with a large combination of, or with a combination of high speed, consumables, which allow it to both increase that speed and essentially disappear at will, is a perfect example of a ship that can not only effectively farm damage from a midpoint or middle destroyer play, but they can also set a flank very quickly. And this clip should show that. It's also a relatively effective boat at stopping pushes because it really can disappear and relocate incredibly quickly. The downside of having a heavy or a high detectability is really offset by that consumable suite where you can smoke up, you can speed boost out, you can relocate incredibly quickly. Another example, this Holland, we have one salvo off on this Holland, and that'll cost him 4,500 points of his life. And again, the agility here allows you to speed up and get away from torpedoes, things like that. The one critical issue that everybody talks about of not being able to move or maneuver in smoke, you really don't have to worry about that because your smoke is coming with you. If we look at how to stop a push, yes, most destroyers are good at stopping pushes. I would contend the Regolo is actually extremely effective at stopping pushes because of the combination of SAP, HE, spam, which nobody likes HE spam. It's a psychological thing as well. And the speed boost in smoke, which allows you to maneuver almost at will. You see this Iowa ends up with a flood. We drop a fire on him as well. We drop another fire on him as well. And yes, there's a Marlboro, there is an Iowa, so we have two ships pushing. We can work on effectively stopping that push just by being here. And as you see how ineffective enemy return fire is because of the smoke. Yes, you can blind fire smoke. That is definitely a thing that people have gotten better at doing in the game. It's a lot harder to blind fire a smoke which is moving. Many players do not have the prediction capacity or the ability to predict where, and that's a perfect example. Most players aren't able to predict where a smoke screen is going to be going or where a ship is going to be going in smoke at 40 knots. You might have somebody, okay, if you're floating around in a gearing smoke, you may be able to blind fire that. However, it's going to be a lot harder to blind fire a ship which is physically moving at 40 to 50 knots. Simple fact and simple reason as to why this boat is so really effective at stopping pushes. You also see the burst damage potential of it. You also see the ability to rotate and get on a flank because of its high base speed. I'm able to actually get to this Iowa's side relatively quickly and effectively put him out of the game. He has no choice. He either backs up or he dies, and in this case he dies. And in this case now you have a perfect 180-degree crossfire. Does the Conde decide to fire at the Izimo and fire at the rest of the battleships, or does he decide to turn around and fire at the destroyer? Using the map, being aware of the map, being aware of how you can rotate effectively and do damage, using your torpedoes in choke points just like that to prevent people from pushing through them because they are incredibly slow. Don't forget, these are not fast torps, these are not Holland torps. People generally forget about them in many cases. It's a very, very effective ship. It's an incredibly effective ship. It does have relatively high alpha strike potential. It really doesn't have great DPM. It has a good suite of tools for you to work with if you're really trying to push the envelope. This is a perfect example here of stopping a push. It's also a very good example of what this ship's true effectiveness is and the ability to disengage when you get into some form of trouble. The Harbin comes around the corner here, and you suddenly go, oh shit, that's a problem. Smart use of consumables. You push the smoke button, and you kite away. You're maneuverable enough that you can rotate to get your front guns on target. Firing angles are not great, but they are not terrible. Instead of going toe-to-toe with a Harbin at 5k and having a 2-kilometer buffer where I need to get out of detection range, I'm suddenly able to just disappear. It's a very effective use of the exhaust smoke consumable that the Italians will get. And it pairs very, very well with the ammunition choices that they've given this. You're able to HE spam, SAP spam from relative safety. You really don't have to worry about being heavily pushed. You really have the speed to run away from almost everything. I mean, there's very, very few ships which are even remotely going to be able to run you down. I mean, if you need to stay dark, it's relatively easy to stay dark and just get away. I mean, that being said, perfect example of, well, the CV here is going to keep me spotted no matter what, and I mistime my acceleration to get away from the torpedo. So that, of course, that in itself, nothing really stops CVs from griefing you. The AA obviously is not anything to speak about, but you're able to see that you can run and gun relatively effectively. You have the ability to kite effectively. You have the ability to tank relatively large amounts of damage, mostly because you have that massive health point, or massive hit point pool. Your smoke comes off cooldown relatively fast, which means that you do have the ability to just disappear if necessary. In this case, you know, we're at 2k. We need to be able to disappear, and we're going to be able to disappear. So in many cases, you need to go dark. You don't want to go dark and run away. You don't have the ability to do damage. You don't have the ability to be useful in that case. Well, now you really have the ability to not only go dark and run away, but continue contributing to the game. At any point when you can contribute to the game on a continual basis, you are going to be significantly more valuable to your team. Quick note on the torpedoes. The torpedoes, like I have said, are very, very slow. These are the kind of torpedoes you should be firing on cooldown. There should be absolutely no reason why your torpedoes are never going unused, right? It's one of the traditional, thoughts that, oh, well, where did these come from? Well, those are Italian. They're very slow. They're Italian. The USS Black is very similar. The Napoli and the Venezia are very similar in that respect. In this case, you're going to see effective use of ammunition switching. We get a flood. We switch to HE to set a fire. We set the fire. We immediately switch to SAP for the Alpha Strike. While he burns, we're going to do additional damage to him and try to get him out of the match. The combination of the two can be extremely effective, and this guy's going to burn out in this case. So even though we only set one fire to him, the use of SAP was very, very solid in terms of chipping him down. Otherwise, that fire doesn't actually do the damage necessary. Another final example of what you can do with this, assuming you only have one ship available or one ship in range, you are generally able to ambush battleships. If you have a low health ship like this, you're able to ambush them and put them out of the game quickly enough that you generally don't have to worry. So again, map awareness is kind of critical for understanding what you can and cannot get away with. For a situation like that or a situation like this, you utilize your smoke. Remember, your smoke is still smoke. You can still utilize it in a camping fashion. Essentially, you're trying to pick any opportunity that you can to do damage. The Italians are not going to be your typical sit and smoke and farm DD. Like I've mentioned many, many times, you have to be very, very particular about how and when you utilize your tools to be match effective. Right? Again, we smoked up. We're sitting here. The Schlieffen sees torpedoes. He knows he can't push here. He turns away. He turns into a broadside for the rest of the team. Sure, we can do damage, but we can also sit, or, we can push him away, but we can also do damage in the meantime. We can also be effective at chipping down his health pool in the meantime. Same type of situation here. In this case, one of the rare occasions you're going to use the ship as a push, and it's one of the few times that it doesn't happen very often, but you can use the Italians to push. And the way you use the Italians to push is particularly if you're able to set a flank, you're able to get out on a flank. You have a combination of tools which allows you to push into an enemy while still doing significant damage and while still remaining relatively safe. Situation develops as having somebody else to spot for you, and you can push out wider on a flank. This is a case of using your tools again, guys. I mean, this is really a case of continuing to use your tools. You're able to get further out on a flank, but if you can get further out on a flank while continuing to do damage and help support your team, help put other ships down, there's no reason not to do it. And these are the opportunities you need to look for when you're playing this entire line. You basically need to look for opportunities where you can do damage while repositioning. It's the best use of your smoke. It's the most effective use of your smoke. Perfect example here again. You have somebody who is spotting for you. In this case, somebody who is tanking for you. Probably could have gone after the Schlieffen here. This is my poor assumption that the Vermont would actually be able to kill the Schlieffen. But see that this is not necessarily going to be the case. It's not immediately. But we're able to run away. And as we're able to run away, we're able to be functional here. We're able to look at the Conde. We're able to do damage to the Conde. We're able to take his attention off of that Vermont for a little while. Granted, we do take a really good beating here, and this guy does have a heal, so at some point the better part of Valor is, don't risk it, but you will see in a little bit here why this ship is actually relatively functional, relatively good in these situations. Again, maneuverability is fairly solid. Maneuverability and engine acceleration are pretty much your main tools for trying to survive in most cases. If you're not dark, you need to be able to speed juke in order to survive. And again, we did manage to whittle down that Conde, and we'll be able to finish the Conde here in a little bit, but it's just a matter of repositioning, like I said, using this ship's speed and maneuverability to reposition into a spot which gives you an advantage. Again, map awareness is the key for this boat. It's the key for the entire line, really. You're not going to win straight-up fights. You have to be able to win... Well, not even have to be able to win fights. You have to be able to pick fights that are essentially 1v1 fights, or fights that you are going to be able to come out on top over time. And in this case, another reason why RPF is a fantastic tool for this, I'm keeping an eye on the RPF to decide where this Conde is, what he's doing. And again, it's a lost game, but nonetheless, we're going to try our best. We see that Conde's on 1,500 and he's healing. We fire a salvo, we hit the speed boost, and then we hit the smoke. He's close enough that his detectability with firing guns and smoke is going to keep him lit. Montana's keeping the Alaska lit for us right now, so we're able to do some work on the Alaska. It does show you the restrictions or the difficulties with using sap on an angle target. If it doesn't have a lot of superstructure, you're going to have a hard time. The HE does hit relatively well. I mean, it's not a high alpha ammunition. It does okay, but it does have a relatively high fire chance, so you're able to get away with it there. Again, we're using the smoke to sort of farm. We're using the smoke to sort of farm as we move across the map. He's trying to blind fire us. He's not able to blind fire us. Again, it's incredibly hard to hit a ship that's moving at 40 knots in smoke. And at this point, the guy's low enough that we can pick an open gunfight with him. Of course, if our shells don't shatter on everything, we're able to pick an open gunfight with him and more effectively deal with him. Of course, here's another example. You can outrun him and you can outturn him, and once you can outturn anybody, you can beat him up pretty well. So hopefully that gives you a pretty solid overview of the Attilio Regolo. We've been playing a lot of it. We played about 25 games in it so far on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/DrDrunkAKA. You can head on over there and take a look at the channel. Give it a follow. That would help us out quite a bit. But we do play a lot of these games on that Twitch channel, so you can hop on over there and see what it's all about. And if I see you over there and ask me to play it, I'll give you a little bit of running commentary on it. Remember, guys, this ship is still in testing. It's technically pre-release. It has not been released as of 11.2. I don't believe it's in the table for 11.3 either. I believe it is still a doubloon purchase for 11.3. The ship may change. Just keep that in mind. But I will go ahead and give this one a thumbs up. It's actually a really good boat. And I think people will have a lot of fun with it once they come to terms with it. Until next time, guys, it is last call. The bar is closing. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.